Welcome to the study of the human body. Chances are that you are taking this course as your first step towards a career in the medical field. So some of my fellow clinicians and I are going to come along on this journey with you. We'll introduce you to each chapter in this book, and we'll explain how you'll apply this material in your future career. This first chapter will serve as your orientation to the human body, covering topics like the language of anatomy, also known as anatomical terminology. As a healthcare professional, it is very important for you to understand terminology like anterior, or the front side of the body when in anatomical position, versus posterior, or the back side of the body in anatomical position, and proximal, which is the closest to the center of the trunk of the body, versus distal, which is the furthest away from the body trunk. You will use these terms every day. For instance, when a patient presents with a wound, you will use anatomical and directional terminology to document the size and placement of the wound in order for the medical team to properly treat it. And you would be able to do this and many other crucial tasks because you have a thorough understanding of anatomical terminology. So let's dive into this chapter and start you on your path towards a rewarding career in healthcare.
Okay, chapter 1, the human body and orientation. Just so you, every semester I have students say, well, I can't study for lecture right now. I'm too busy studying for lab. Well, they're the same, and actually they support each other. So, there's going to be some things that are highlighted in lecture, like physiology. But the reason that anatomy is the way that it is so that our body will function the way that it does. So form fits function. In your lecture book, they use the term complementarity of structure and function, which essentially means form fits function. The way that we are made, we're made that way so that we can function at our best. So anatomy is what are we? We're the study of the things, the structures of our body parts and their relationship to one another. Physiology is how things work. So how do they function? And you can think of it on a big level. So gross anatomy would be like what you see. But of course, there's microscopic anatomy. We're going to go and look at slides, different histology in lab, and you'll see that different kinds of tissues have different kinds of microanatomy. So what you see, the structure is anatomy. How it works, the function, is physiology. Sometimes you'll hear gross anatomy called macroscopic anatomy, but honestly, most commonly it's called gross anatomy. And then that can be broken down into regions. So for example, let's say a physical therapist might be amazing at the regional anatomy of your ankle, knowing every single detail of what makes up that ankle so that when you twist your ankle and it's all black and blue, and they'll run a certain test and say, okay, this is ligament damage rather than broken bone, because by their training, they're excellent at that region of anatomy. So regional anatomy is that particular area. System anatomy is what you think of as specialists, let's say a cardiovascular surgeon. He better be really good at the anatomy of the cardiovascular system, right? If he's doing whatever, open heart surgery or removing a tumor that's wrapped around major vessels, things like that. He needs to be pretty good at that. And that's just one example. And when we get into the systems, you can think of, okay, so here's the nervous system. You're going to have a neurologist, and that person is excellent at the system of the nervous system. And of course, usually specialists also are excellent at systemic physiology, or you would hope they would be anyway. Surface anatomy would be like what you see on the outside of the body. So a dermatologist would be pretty darn good at surface anatomy. And maybe, okay, I see this vessel running across the top of my hand. And on that hand, I see a freckle or some sort of cyst, something like that. Okay, and then, so gross anatomy is the start. That's the big, what you see. Microscopic anatomy is still structures, they're just tiny. So it's broken down into two different kinds. Cytology is looking at individual cells. So you could look at a cell and tell, for example, a neuron is a type of cell, looks way different from a skin cell because their microscopic anatomy is physically different. It looks different under the microscope. Histology is the one that actually is more common when you, let's say, have a biopsy, and what the doctor has done is taken an entire tissue sample and sent a section of tissue to the lab. And so let's say he biopsied your intestines. So full thickness starting from the outside, the serosal surface, and then he's cut through the muscular layer and going all the way down into the internal part where your food passes by. That's the epithelial layer. And the histologist is going to evaluate all of that. The inside layer, which is epithelium, the muscular layer, and the serosal layer, the outside. It's more detailed than that, but you get the idea. Developmental anatomy is another subdivision of anatomy, and this is not a complete list by any means, but a developmental anatomy is how things, especially the biggest subdivision of developmental is embryology. So from point of conception, those two cells come together, sperm and egg, to create one cell that is you, and then that one cell rapidly divides to 2 to 4 to 8 to 16 to 32. You get the idea. But that one cell is going to become your hair and your toenail and your heart and your skin. So that shows development, differentiation into different parts. So that's developmental anatomy. There's others, for example, comparative anatomy is not on your list, but comparing what a human is to an ape or to a monkey, or for veterinary medicine, the dog is very different from a cat, is very different from a horse, is very different from a cow, structurally. So different subdivisions. Well, to study anatomy, you have to be able to understand how things are situated in the body. And so often we'll talk about anatomical position, and we're going to do that in lab as well. Definitely the first part of lab, it's very helpful to have your lecture book available, and some of you have the e-text, that's fine. But you can visualize it in more detail and help it all sink in better. You can, if you have a pet perhaps, or a willing human being in your household, you can actually feel certain things. So when we're doing muscles, maybe you probably all know what a biceps is. Biceps brachii is the Popeye muscle. He ate his spinach and he's got big old biceps. Well, if you want to feel that muscle, you can go to somebody in the house. You can feel your own and palpate that area. Subdivisions of physiology are like I mentioned, there's the organ system. So how does the heart work? How does the blood move? This also gives the example of kidneys. So how do those kidneys function? What is their job? Things like that. Physiology is definitely more of a molecular level kind of thing, which is why a lot of people find physiology fascinating or not. Perhaps it's a little stressful to you because maybe you don't like things that you can't see. Anatomy is a whole lot of memorization. Physiology is a whole lot of understanding. They're different. All right. But because form fits function, they are inseparable. If you are thinking about moving on to like becoming a medical doctor, get an MD, then you will have anatomy separated from physiology because we're only kind of touching the surface on these kind of things. We're doing the highlights of anatomy. But you'll see when we get to, say, muscles, we're not learning every single muscle. Even though your lecture book does list all the muscles, we're going to highlight specific ones in the lab book. This is showing an example of form fits function. So those front teeth on the left-hand side, those are incisors, and their job is to bite. They actually have quite a sharp edge, and the purpose is to scissor off a piece of food. The back ones, the molars, are much more flat. The reason that they're flat is because their purpose is to actually chew. After you bite off your food, you don't chew with your front teeth, your incisors. You chew, you grind with the molars in the back. So they're flattened so that they can help grind. Form fits function. They look this way because they do this. Another example would be your ear. Why is your pinna, so the flap of your ear that you can see, the outer flap, pinna, why does it look that way? Well, it looks that way. It's cupped to catch sound waves and help direct it towards your ear canal, your outer ear canal, so it can concentrate down the canal to your eardrum, and we'll talk about that at the end of the semester. But your pinna is shaped that way to do its very best at catching sound waves. If you did not have a pinna, you would have no idea what direction that sound was coming from. All right, so the next part of your lecture book talks about the hierarchy of structural organization. How is everything set up? When we get to chemistry, a lot of people start freaking out, and I'm here to tell you, I could not teach a chemistry class, and I'm probably going to say this a few times. I'm not a chemist. I'm a biologist. So we're not doing anything extensive in the chemistry part. Very, very minimum, just so you understand how things happen in the body. So from the tiniest level, we have atoms. And when you think about the periodic table, you are thinking about those elements in atomic form. So that's the tiniest level. Those atoms don't like to be alone. They like to combine with things. And so when they combine with things, they're going to become molecules. Even if they combine with themselves, it's a molecule. And then what's an organelle? Well, if you you hear the term organ, and especially with Latin differentiation, when you say L, that is indicating small. So organelles are tiny organs. The next level is a cell. Well, the cell is the smallest living unit on this planet. That cell has little organs called organelles. You've probably, in the past from high school, heard of a mitochondria. The mitochondria is the reason you're alive, because that guy on the inside of him, he makes ATP. So ATP is energy. That's what keeps us alive. That's just one of many organs inside of the cell. So we start with atoms. Atoms combine to make molecules. You get some molecules combining to form the little organelles inside of a cell, and then we move to the next level. So cellular level is the cell. But you put a bunch of similar cells together and you've created a tissue. You put two or more types of tissue together and you've created an organ. Different organs coming together to form one general function is going to be the organ system. So let's do urinary system. You've got some kidneys, and those kidneys' job is to maintain your water balance, maintain your electrolyte balance, eliminate waste, especially nitrogenous waste. So your kidneys are going to do all that work and create urine. That urine is going to leave the kidneys through something called a ureter, and the ureter empties into the urinary bladder. The urinary bladder is just a holding vessel. It's holding on to that urine until it's time to urinate. When it's time to urinate, you pass that urine through a urethra to the outside world. So the organ system of the urinary system consists of the kidneys, the ureter, the bladder, and the urethra. That's the system. And then finally, you put all those systems together and you have you and me. That would be the organism. So organismal level, the organism, the person. This is just showing a picture. So let's see, do I have a pointer? Yes, I do. So this is atoms are going to be what you think of with the periodic table. These guys are going to bond either to themselves, so maybe oxygen is going to bind with another oxygen, so you have O2, or it might bond with some hydrogens, so two hydrogens and an oxygen makes water. Those are molecules, right? You put a bunch of molecules together and you've formed some little organs, and the next level of organization is that cell. Inside that cell, it's not showing the picture, but inside that cell is many little organs, many organelles. There's a nucleus, there's a Golgi apparatus, there's smooth endoplasmic reticulum, rough endoplasmic reticulum. We'll get into more of that in lab and lecture later. And then we have this tissue. So here on this tissue, we have showing all those smooth muscle cells together. There's probably some other things inside that tissue too, but the majority of that is smooth muscle cells. Then when you get into the organ, almost all organs have all four tissue types. There's exceptions always in science, but in general, we're going to talk about the different kinds of tissues that they have. There's 4 different tissues, and most organs have all 4 that have the job of one particular thing. That organ has a goal. And then, as we put all of our organs together, they all work together to keep our body in something called homeostasis, in normalcy, in health. So all of our organ systems work together to keep you and me a healthy organism. I'm going to go through all this real quick. Okay. Okay, things that maintain life as normal. Boundaries is a biggie. So skin's an easy one. Our skin is the largest organ. Our integumentary system is our largest organ. It is keeping the outside world out, and it's keeping our inside world in. If something happens to the skin, like severe burns, you invite infection, you create dehydration almost instantly. It's a very rapid, depending on how severe your burn is, it could mean rapid death in minutes due to dehydration. We have boundaries that are tinier than that, though, things that we just don't really even think about. So we have our cells, smallest living unit. Our cells have a cell membrane that keeps other things outside of that cell, outside of the cell. And the things that are inside of the cell keeps them inside of the cell. There's boundaries. And then we're going to learn later that that cell membrane has rules on what lets things in and out of the cell. So boundaries are super important. Your chest cavity is separate from your abdominopelvic cavity. We don't want our guts up around our heart. That's an impedance. And actually, if you get a hernia and your guts do end up going up around your heart, let's say your liver and your stomach and your intestines, you're probably going to start to throw arrhythmias to your heart. We have to have these boundaries to keep us healthy. Normal life usually involves movement, and you would think movement, us walking across the room. But there's other kinds of movements, such as that cell membrane that's allowing water into the cell. That's movement. Or maybe excreting some carbon dioxide or some sort of waste product. It leaves the cell. That's movement too. There's all kinds of different movements that are happening in your body by the trillions every second of your life. Responsiveness. If something happens at point A, your body is going to respond at point B to it. So let's do a hormone. Your body releases ADH, which is anti-diuretic hormone. The response is your body's going to start to conserve water. You don't want anti-diuretic. So diuretic makes you urinate more. Anti-diuretic makes you urinate less. So that is a response to the hormone. ADH is to hold on to the water and keep that water in your body and not urinate it out. Digestion, that's an easy one. Metabolism, I'm going to get to that slide in just a minute. Excretion, that's eliminating things from the body. Reproduction, that's obvious, make more of the being. And then growth. Growth starts from the very beginning. So that first cell becoming 2 cells, becoming 4 cells, blah, blah, blah. Digestion, I'll touch on that for a minute. I kind of skipped over digestion. It's breaking what you ate down so it can be used. So it is necessary for that piece of pizza that was amazingly delicious. That the carbohydrate, the crust, is no good to you that big. It must be broken down into tiny sugars in order to be usable. Same thing with proteins. Protein, the pepperoni that was on that, it needs to be broken down into amino acids. You can't absorb the pepperoni into your bloodstream. That pepperoni has to be broken down into a tiny little molecule to be of any use. Okay, here's the slide for metabolism. So everybody thinks metabolism is the way you break things down. Oh, I have a fast metabolism, so therefore I'm skinny. Metabolism is actually the combination of how you break things down and how you build things up. When you break things down, that's called catabolism. How do you break down that pepperoni into amino acids? And then anabolism is how did you use all that all the amino acids that you got from the pepperoni? Did you use it to build up some muscle? Did you build a nice strong tissue with that? When you build things up, that's anabolism. So metabolism is actually the combination of your breaking down and your building up of molecules. This slide I use to actually emphasize anabolic type reactions versus catabolic reactions. People think about steroids as that guy on the left. So look at those biceps. That is not normal. Look where he is, police department, with his little handcuffs. So anabolic steroids build muscle. But they do other things too, because it's not that simple. If we were meant to be taking anabolic steroids all the time, we would be an amazing race. But in fact, by building up these biceps, this man is also making his testicles really tiny. So pluses and minuses, right, y'all? Catabolic steroids is the kind of steroids that are released from the adrenal glands on a stress level. So this person on the right-hand side has a Cushing's syndrome, which means that his adrenal glands, for whatever reason, we'll get into that in AMP2, his adrenal glands are putting out excessive glucocorticoids. Those kind of steroids break down muscle. They actually break down skin, so you can see a lot of stretch marks on him. His tissue might even almost look like tissue paper. So catabolism breaks things down. So obviously humans are multicellular. We have different organ systems that have different jobs, but they all work together to keep our life in balance. So again, we've got this, I think this might even be moving into exercise 2 of lab, the different 11 organ systems. And this is just showing how these guys work together. So, you think, okay, I take in some oxygen so that I can breathe. Well, what's actually happening with that oxygen is it's eventually being transported through the blood to all different systems so all those systems can do their job. The oxygen allows that mitochondria inside your cells to make ATP, which is energy, because creating urine requires energy. It's work. So that oxygen is actually getting into each and every cell. So each and every cell, the smallest living unit, can do its job. Okay, so let's start with the integumentary system. This is the largest system. Some things that we think about, easy little accessory things like hair, skin, nails. Hair and nails. But the skin, like I mentioned earlier, keeps the outside world out and protects all your inside stuff, and it keeps it in, such as water. Another major important thing that integumentary system does is it helps us feel. So if there is, let's say your leg is getting too close to the tailpipe of your car while you're getting your groceries out, you start to feel that heat, you pull away, hopefully before you get burned. Or something a little smaller would be, let's say you feel something crawling across your leg and you look down and start to swat all instantly because you had that sensation and maybe you were worried that it was a spider, when in fact maybe it was just a fly, or maybe it was a spider. Whatever, get it off. Vitamin D. Vitamin D, The beginning of synthesis of vitamin D begins in the skin. So your skin, because of sunlight, creates one of the precursors of vitamin D. If you are low on vitamin D, you cannot absorb calcium. So you might drink milk and eat your yogurt and do a really good job of getting the calcium intake. But if you're low on vitamin D because you never go outside and you don't take any supplements, you're not going to absorb that calcium. If you're a female over 40, it's recommended that you start taking calcium supplements such as Caltrate, for example. Well, if you look at Caltrate isn't just calcium. It's a calcium and a vitamin D3 supplement, because that calcium supplement doesn't do squat if you are low on vitamin D. So a Caltrate supplements your vitamin D to make sure that you can absorb your calcium. But if you go outside all the time, your vitamin D should be really good, because the sunlight's what helps our body get that thing started. Hair, you probably recognize that especially if you have teenagers, how the glands that are at the base of the hairs produce oils. Those oils help protect you as well. Sweat helps to cool you off if you get too hot. All of that's part of the integumentary system. The next system, the skeletal system. So you might want to say that the skeleton is the reason that you move, but actually it's your muscles that make you move, but they have to be attached to bones. So the skeletal system is actually leverage for movement. It's a lever system. You probably learned about levers in high school, like the wheelbarrow and tweezers and things like that. It's a lever system that allows for movement. So it provides support and structure, leverage for movement. Another important thing on the inside of bones, if it has red marrow, which we'll get into more detail in lab, if it has red marrow, well, then it is able to produce blood cells. And I'm not just talking about red blood cells. I'm talking about red cells and white cells and platelets. And there's lots of different kinds of white cells. Another thing is bones store minerals, such as calcium. So let's go back to that example again. If you are low on calcium, because you don't have any calcium in your diet, or maybe your calcium intake's fine, but you're low on vitamin D, so therefore you can't absorb your calcium. Calcium is so important for so many things. You must have calcium to contract your muscles. You must have calcium to fire a neuron so that you could think or move neurotransmitters, whatever, for your heart to beat. All these things are very important for calcium. So if for whatever reason you're not absorbing your calcium, you're not taking enough calcium, where's your body going to get it from? To keep you in homeostasis, to keep you in normalcy, it's going to pluck it from your bones. So you actually can weaken your bones. See how all these things kind of go together? I must have my heart contracting and relaxing. So I must have calcium to be alive. You don't have to have nice strong bones to stay alive. So your body's going to start to pluck it from your bones. The next one is the muscular system. So the biggest thing is the fact that you can think about how it makes you move. You have different kinds of muscles. So I just mentioned your heart. That's cardiac muscle. Skeletal muscle is the one that we always think about. But how about this? You just ate that pizza. And the pizza that was in your mouth is now moved from your esophagus into your stomach. And it's being moved around inside your stomach. Are you in charge of that? You're not. Your stomach is moving all that involuntarily, And that is because it's got smooth muscle. So that kind of muscle is still producing motion. It's still doing, it's got a job, but it is helping your food move around. Sitting up straight, maintaining posture so that you can not get poor curvature of the spine, for example. That is your skeletal muscles doing that. And then if you get cold, what do? You shiver. When your muscles start to shiver, they create heat. So another function of the muscle system is to create heat if needed. Nervous system. Nervous system is rapid communication. It's electricity. It's a zap that is released from a neuron that says, do this now. And in a nanosecond, a neurotransmitter has been released and told its target what to do. The endocrine system is slow communication. It's made up of hormones. These glands in the endocrine system might release hormones to a close by structure or a far away structure. When it's far away, so let's say, your brain actually makes several different hormones. So I will say your pituitary gland released adrenocorticotropin hormone. It's going to go tell the adrenal glands to do something. So ACTH is released into the blood. It's got to travel all the way down to your adrenal glands. Your brain is up in your head. Your adrenal glands are on top of the kidneys. So that is, the communication is going to happen, but it's not going to be a zap like the nervous system. It's going to be a little bit slower. We have lots of different hormones, and we'll get into those, a few of those endocrine organs in lab, but in much more detail in A&P2. The cardiovascular system is all about transport. So your heart is moving the blood around because it's the pump, and your vessels are the railways for that. I need to move some oxygen to my cells so they can stay alive. Those cells, because they're the smallest living unit, they take in that oxygen and they create carbon dioxide. All your carbon dioxide that you exhale out came from your trillions and trillions and trillions of cells. So all of that's going to get transported through your vascular system. That hormone that I just talked about, ACTH from your brain going to your adrenal gland, it is the transportation system of that hormone. Okay, the immune system gets lumped into the lymphatic system. So the lymphatic system perfectly is the next system. But if you hear the term the immune system, that's actually part of the lymphatic system. So this is an odd thing. Some people have a hard time grasping this, but your vessels have pressure in it, right? That heart is going lub-dub, 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 and pushing on those little railway systems. And because of that pressure, some fluid actually leaks out of the tiniest vessels called capillaries. But that's okay because we have the lymphatic system, which looks very similar vessel-wise. There are some differences, but its job is to pick up any of that fluid that leaked out and put it back into the cardiovascular system. So one job of the lymphatic system is to pick up any fluids that have leaked out and get it back into the vessels. The other thing is that the lymphatic system houses the white blood cells, the guys that are in charge of your immune system. So the lymphatic system, will just also learn more about it in detail in A&P2, but he is the holder of the things that are going to fight off diseases, the white cells. Respiratory system, He's the guy that's going to give you some energy. So when you breathe in, you get oxygen. The purpose of that oxygen is to find a mitochondria so that you can make some ATP. Without ATP, you're dead. So we think that oxygen is the main goal, but in fact, oxygen's purpose is to create energy. So perfectly, the respiratory system is to create energy. You take in oxygen, bring it to all your cells. Those cells are alive. They're going to get rid of their carbon dioxide. The vessels are going to bring all that back to the lungs, and you're going to exhale your trillions of cells carbon dioxide that they're making every second. Digestive system is simplification of food. The pepperoni is no good to you. You can't get the pepperoni into your cells. It has to be broken down. It has to be simplified into smaller, usable parts. So when we do in the chemistry section, we'll do the different kinds of organic materials, but you already know 3 of them: proteins, carbs, fats. They need to be broken into the tiniest molecules so that we can absorb them into our blood. You cannot absorb a pepperoni through your capillary system. That pepperoni is going to get broken down. The protein of the pepperoni is going to be broken down into amino acids, and the amino acids can get into your blood so that you can use them to go lift weights and make bigger biceps, for example. If it is unusable food, then you'll just poop it out. The urinary system is the true eliminator of waste materials. So poisonous wastes usually are going to come mostly from the proteins. It's going to be little slivers of nitrogen plus some other little pieces of molecules. And so it's called nitrogenous waste. And you're going to urinate that out. But also, he makes sure that you have plenty of water. He makes sure you have the right balance of electrolytes. And he makes sure that you have the right balance of acids and bases in the blood. That's the urinary system's job. He's huge. And of course, you can see how if this fails, then you're not going to make it. If this becomes out of homeostasis, you don't regulate your water, you don't get rid of toxic nitrogenous waste, your acid-base balance is messed up, you can't live. The male reproductive system is going to be one of 2 parts. I personally don't think that the reproductive systems, for the purpose of AMP1, need to be divided into 2. It's all about reproduction. The male delivers male gametes to the female reproductive tract. The female reproductive tract has female gametes, and together they continue the organisms, the species. Female, so the male makes the sperm, the female makes the eggs. Females also have mammary glands that help feed the new organism after the baby's been made. So what do we need to survive? Everybody knows about nutrients, right? You have to have food. You have to have oxygen. You have to have water. The next 2 things we don't think about as much, but they clearly are obviously very important. You have to be maintained at a certain temperature. So if you haven't seen the Titanic, then you don't know what I'm talking about, but those people all got too cold. When their body went to a temperature that is too low, then all the systems slow down to a stop. You have to be a certain temperature for your body to do its work. If you get too hot, I'm sure you've heard of heat stroke. If you've been in Texas for any summer at all, you get too hot, and so your tissues actually start to cook. So, you can't, if you have some ground meat and you cook it up and it all turns brown, you're never going to get that meat red again. It's done. It has been denatured. Okay, and then atmospheric pressure. You know, the spaceman can't go out into space without his suit because the suit helps maintain the pressure that our bodies are used to. So the pressure out in space is non-existent. So if you didn't have your spacesuit on, you don't have the pressure keeping all your cells together. So if you've watched the 100 series, I think that's Netflix, whenever somebody does something wrong, instead of, you know, like a fair trial, whatever, they just kick them out into space without a suit, and so they just explode. They don't show that, though. That would be kind of graphic. Let's see, if you go down deep into the sea, the pressures are really, really high. So a submarine has a certain depth that it can go before it itself actually would get crushed. But a submarine maintains normal atmospheric pressure for those people in it because of the way that it's been created. But maybe if you've watched The Hunt for the Red October, that's another movie that if they started to go too far down and the metal of the sub actually started to dent because they were trying to get away from, I don't remember, Russians or something. Who knows? Maybe they were the Russians. But anyway, they're trying to get away from somebody. So without these things, you cannot survive. Keeping our bodies in a stable condition is called homeostasis. Every system's job, every system works together to maintain our body in homeostasis. So, 107 degrees outside last weekend, for example. Well, I guess it depends on when you're listening to this. But anyway, stinking hot. So what do? You're working outside, it's hot, you start to sweat. What's the purpose? Your integumentary system, your sweat glands start to release sweat. That goes to the surface of your skin and it evaporates. That's a cooling mechanism. That's to keep you from dying of heat stroke. That is keeping your body in homeostasis. Your skin is keeping you alive. If it's really, really cold outside and you are starting to get chilled, your body starts to shiver, your muscles start to shake, and that creates heat to maintain your normal 98.6 or to keep you in that range that is healthy. So we have two systems, the nervous system and the endocrine system are the major players to maintain homeostasis, but all the systems can help one way or another. And again, we'll get into especially the endocrine system in more detail in AMP2. But what happens is we have three parts that make up the homeostatic controls. We have a receptor, a control center, and an effector. The receptor is what recognizes what's going on in the environment. So when I'm talking about temperature outside, we're talking about the environment outside. And our brain recognizes, whew, that's very hot, control center. He says, I'm not 98.6 anymore. I'm getting up to whatever, 100.2, 100.5. So the brain sends out a signal to the glands that say, you need to start producing some sweat. You have homeostatic controls on the inside of your body too. So for example, if you just ate a piece of pizza, your body recognizes there's some carbohydrates in there and there's some proteins in there and there's some fats in there. So I need to release the right digestive enzymes to break that down. So the receiver is actually in the GI tract and it recognizes what what kind of food you just put in your mouth, and it's going to your nervous system is going to tell your small intestines and your pancreas what kind of enzymes to release to break down what you just put in your mouth. So the person that, or the organ that puts out the enzyme, small intestines, pancreas, is going to be the effector. The nervous system is still the control center. Now, most of the time, what will happen is we'll have a negative feedback. So when you, let's say you got cold, and so you start to shiver, and now you're at 98.6, well, you're going to slow down on your shivering. So you kind of decrease what you are doing to change the temperature. That's called negative feedback. So usually we'll start to reduce that that change, or even stop it once things are normal. I'm going to give you an example that you have in everyday life, the air condition unit. So you have your thermostat, the control center, set at, let's say, 75 degrees. It's hot outside. And now your house is 79 degrees. So the stimulus is the change in temperature. Your air is 79 degrees. The unit that measures, the thermostat measures, okay, I'm not 75 anymore, I'm 79. So that thermostat tells the AC unit to kick on, to get it back to 75 degrees. So it does. It turns on and it gets to 75, and then it's like, okay, I've done my job. I'm going to stop now. That's a negative feedback. Most of our body is under negative feedback. I'm going to do what I need to do to get things back to normal, and then I'm going to stop doing it. Until we're into balance. So I'm going to skip these slides. Positive feedback is different and not that common. Positive feedback, something, you still have a stimulus. So you still receive some sort of stimulus that tells a control center to do something, and then there's a response. But instead of that response making everything be negative and stop, it becomes more intense and more intense and more intense until whatever the stimulus is gone. So you're going to have a baby. It is time to have the baby. The baby's head pushes on the cervix. That's the stimulus. So your brain, or the female's brain, puts out oxytocin, goes through the bloodstream, goes to the uterus, and that causes the uterus to contract. Well, then what happens? The baby's pushing even more on the cervix now, which makes the brain put out even more oxytocin, which makes the baby's head push even more on the cervix. So you put out more oxytocin. So you see, it doesn't stop. It gets more and more and more intense. And if you've had a baby, you know what I'm talking about, that intensity. It does not stop until the baby is out. So positive feedback, not that common, but it intensifies. It doesn't go backwards to a stop point like the air condition unit. Or let's say the pepperoni, your body got the message, I need the enzyme to break down protein. Okay, good job. You can stop releasing that now. That's not what happens with positive feedback. So positive feedback, having a baby is a great explanation. We all kind of understand how that goes. But milk production, so the baby cries, you release milk. the baby sucks the milk, your brain makes you make more milk and more milk and more milk until that baby is full. Blood clotting is another example of positive feedback, and we'll get into that in the MP2. So, disturbance of homeostasis. If something goes wrong with homeostasis, if you have an imbalance, you have an increased risk of disease. Things just aren't working like they're supposed to. And as we get older, that's why we start to have more disease, because things just aren't working right as well as they used to. They're tired. And so we're more likely to have homeostatic imbalances as we get older.